Hi everybody, my name is Emer Hines and I'm the CEO of Text 100, and I wanted to welcome you all to our offices here tonight. It is an absolute pleasure to host this incredibly important event. And I want to say that huge gratitude to Elisa Steele, our wonderful client who is the CEO of Jive Software. We had a conversation some months ago about Jive Software's involvement in the HeForShe initiative, and it was a really easy conversation when we talked about this upcoming event, and it was very easy to discuss this notion that we would host this, and it's an incredible honor for us to do this. And I just want to say we should have more coffees together, because I think great things come from our conversations. HeForShe for Text 100, we are a global PR agency, and we are in an industry that is predominantly female-based, and yet we struggle with many of the same issues in terms of the rise of gender equality in our management across the world. And so for me personally, this is an initiative that is very close to my heart, and I know very close to the people at Text 100 in every single market we operate in across the world. So I'm very excited about the panel discussion tonight. I want to introduce you to our facilitator and host, Michal Lev-Ram, who is senior writer at Fortune magazine, and I would say in our industry particularly probably one of the most influential and prolific writers in the technology industry in Silicon Valley. So I'm going to hand you over to her, who will introduce the panel for this evening. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. It's truly a first to be introduced by somebody with a harder to pronounce name than mine, so I appreciate it. Thank you all for being here. How many of you watched Emma Watson's speech 2014? Okay, so you all know a little bit about HeForShe. I'm just going to give a little bit more background. It was created by UN Women, the United Nations entity for gender equality. And the HeForShe movement provides a systematic approach and targeted platform on which men and boys can engage to become change agents towards the achievement of gender equality in this lifetime. I actually went back and rewatched Emma Watson's speech last night and found it just as moving as watching it the first time. And I will let Elizabeth, of course, our guest of honor, tell us a lot more about the campaign. But just in a little bit more information. So it was launched in September 20th, 2014, again, by Emma Watson's speech. And HeForShe has since been the subject of more than 2 billion conversations on social media, with offline activities reaching every corner of the globe. We encourage everybody to live tweet during the event using the hashtag. It always feels repetitive to say use the hashtag, but use the hashtag HeForShe16SV, as in Silicon Valley, I think. All right, and now to introduce Elizabeth. So Elizabeth Nyamayaro is a senior advisor to Undersecretary General UN Women, head of HeForShe campaign. Elizabeth has worked at the forefront of Africa's development agenda for more than a decade in both the public and private sector, and she has held positions with UNAIDS, the World Health Organization, and the World Bank. In addition to her role at UN Women as senior advisor to the executive director and head of HeForShe, Elizabeth is the founder of Africa IQ, an innovative social impact organization with a mission to promote Africa's sustainable economic growth and development. That is an impressive bio. And Elizabeth, with that, please come up onto the stage. I think you're over here.
Thank you.
All right, so I assume everybody here, we all know that you're familiar, you raised your hands, and that you are either already a part of HeForShe, are involved in some way, or are interested in learning more about it. Unless you're against gender equality, in which case you're probably in the wrong room. You can leave now quietly, we won't say anything. But Elizabeth, can you kind of walk us back, just tell us how this all started? You've been with the UN for a long time, but this is a relatively new role for you. How did the campaign begin?
Well, thank you very much. And again, I want to start by acknowledging everyone who's here today. We really appreciate this, especially in Silicon Valley. Interesting story, actually, because first companies say that I was the mastermind behind HeForShe, but the honest truth is that HeForShe is a people's movement. And I think, I've seen and heard this over and over again over the past year as I've traveled around the world to speak to men and boys. And they say to me, it's the same thing. HeForShe has tapped into something within them, but there's something that was already there, something that they already cared about. And so, we've had such incredible stories, and I'll share very quickly a story about a guy in Nigeria who, a week after we launched HeForShe, sent a very powerful email to Phumzile, the head of UN Women, and tells a story about how he had grown up next door, living to this man who continuously beat up his wife. And we launched HeForShe. Phumzile had a radio interview, and he said that he was listening to his radio one afternoon, and he heard about HeForShe, and Phumzile spoke about the need for men to play their role. And a few hours later, he heard the woman cry again, and for the first time, he didn't just sit there. He said, I felt compelled to do something. I went over and I confronted the husband, and madam, it's been 2 weeks and the woman has not cried. So thank you for giving me the voice and the courage to do this. But to answer your question more specifically, I think on a personal... Thank you. On a personal level, having worked for the UN, as you mentioned, for more than a decade on developmental work, there has been this very underlying tone in everything that I've done in terms of the inequality, the gender dimension that happens when we're addressing these really important issues. From the work with UNAIDS, men being the ones that get to decide whether a woman has access to ARVs, or a man deciding when and how many children a woman should have. And so the flip side of this also was seeing the incredible work that women actually do when they're empowered. I worked on a very prominent initiative at WHO on river blindness, and it's one of the most successful public-private partnership on how they engage women to deliver medicine to these communities. So long story short, 2 years ago, I found myself with the incredible honor to serve as Phumzile's senior advisor. And there was this incredible woman, one of my biggest role models, who was part of the anti-apartheid movement, a freedom fighter in South Africa, who understood what it meant to address one of the biggest inequalities at the time. And of course, this is her new mission as the head of UN Women. And it became very clear to us that we needed to build solidarity, that we couldn't do this with one side of the conversation missing from the table. And so that was really the beginning of HeForShe, and now I sort of lead the global vision and strategy and implementation of the initiative.
Did you have, were there male role models for you personally that sort of helped inspire this also, or help sort of bring about the realization that you needed to involve this whole other half of the population in making this a reality?
Certainly. I mean, I grew up in a very humble upbringing in Africa, and again, the dimension was the boys went to school, the girls did not. And even though I came from a very humble family, I think my father, even with the little that we had, secretly he supported I'm the first child, and he supported that I would one day pursue an education. And so I think that for me was a very important sort of moment in my life, to know that even though he didn't have the enlightenment that you would expect, this was something that was important to him. And of course, in my career, I mean, I've had such incredible mentors, that have helped me to be here, and most of them have been men. So yeah, it's.
So Emma Watson gave her talk. Talk about the reaction afterwards from men primarily.
Yes. So the engagement of Emma Watson was also very critical. We, as UN Women, we are the global entity for gender equality. Our job is to literally create equal opportunities for every single woman and every single girl, no matter who they are, no matter where they live. So we have this really, really big mandate, right? More than half of the world's population now is women and girls. And so we also needed to find a way to engage the young population. And so Emma Watson, felt to me like a very natural selection, because she's somebody who had been involved in a lot of social impact work. And in meeting with her, it was the meeting of minds, and she understood that this was not, and neither did she want the celebrity engagement, but really to engage as a thought leader. So And she shared her personal story, which I won't repeat. And it was just something that, was very powerful. And the speech, as you mentioned, was watched more than 100 million times. Within just 3 days of launching HeForShe, we had more than 100,000 men that had signed up to the movement. And within that first week, at least one man in every single country in the world. And so again, it was such a powerful speech, and I'm very proud of her, and feel very humbled that I get to work with her.
Yeah, I bet. What's the approach to it though, longer term? Because it started out primarily as an online campaign, right? And primarily targeted at men also. So can you talk about some of the progress that you've made and then what's next? Because I hear that you're opening HeForShe for women as well soon. So
yes, indeed. And actually, the interesting thing is that
HeForShe.
It has always been open, right? And I remember even the first days, people sort of asked, well, what is the role of women in this? And I said, well, HeForShe it's a women's rights movement initiative, so women are already in it. We just need to bring the other half to the table. But indeed, I think you address this. The issue of gender inequality, it can seem like boiling an ocean, which seems rather impossible. And so with HeForShe, we decided to take a systematic approach. So there's the bottom-up approach, the grassroots element of it, which is really looking at behavioral change. What can an individual man and boy do? What can an individual woman do to support this vision of a gender equal world? But also, being realistic with the situation and the systematic and structural change that needs to happen, because again, currently the power dynamics, there's still more men in power. It doesn't matter where you look. And so how do we also engage these men as individuals, but also as leaders that can then be catalysts for change? And we have this awesome Impact 10 by 10 by 10 initiative where we've been able to mobilize heads of states, CEOs, and university president. Of course, I'm very proud to be here because PwC, our impact champion, and of course Twitter have been instrumental in helping put this together.
And what's next?
So what's next for HeForShe is, so we started as an awareness campaign, right? And we're almost sort of testing the grounds. Do men really care about this issue? Do they want to be part of this? And actually the answer was yes. As I said to you, a lot of men said, this has been a long time coming. They have wanted to engage with this movement. They didn't know how to engage. They didn't feel welcome. In some cases, they were made to feel guilty for the sins of other men. And so we took a very different approach to say, this is not about shaming. There's no taboos. It's about really everybody coming to work together. So the first year has been really driving to get as many men to the table. But as we get into phase 2 of the movement, next week we are going to be launching a new platform for HeForShe, which takes a much more inclusive approach, not only women, but also looking at the other gender dimensions, right? So the LGBTQ community. We have to have an inclusive movement that includes everybody. And so you see a lot of this content also start to change, again, in a very much more inclusive, much more action-oriented as well. I think, one of the current gaps on the website right now is, a man signs up and then what, right? We don't want click activism. We actually want to drive for sustainable change. And so you will see too with the new website, there's clear things that men can do. There are clear actions. There's impact stories. We're starting to share what has happened over the past year as a way to inspire other men as well to take action, but also finding a big voice for women as well within, and again, all other genders within that platform.
We're going to call up our other panelists in just a minute, but one more question for you. What does success look like for the campaign? I mean, what's the ultimate goal here?
We want to achieve gender equality. I mean, it's that simple. It really is that simple. We really want to achieve gender equality. And this is why we have to find a way that we can build the same social movement. And I know sometimes, for good reasons, the feminists have been very protective. This has been our space for a very long time. We have made it this far on our own. But what we are trying to do with HeForShe is not to say men are coming to save women, because we're not helpless, but it's really about how do we create a social movement. We've seen this over and over again. Civil rights movement, you talk about the gay rights movement, you talk about the anti-apartheid movement. You have to get everybody involved. And so for us, really, it's how do we create the same level of agency, the fierce agency of the now? How do we create the same, empower every single person? Because every single action actually matters, no matter how small it may appear to you. Even just being here today, you've taken the first step, and again, we're very grateful for that.
And I want to really commend the men in the room for leaning in tonight. So thank you for being here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and call up our panelists. If you guys could make your way up here, and then I'll introduce you. Watch your step. All right. Okay, so I'll let you guys get seated. I'll start with Colby. Colby Conner is a partner of finance, which do you prefer? Finance. All right, fine. We won't get fancy. Partner of finance and performance management consulting with PwC. Elisa Steele is the CEO of Jive Software, and Marianne Cooper. We have some jivers here in the room. Yeah, Marianne Cooper, a sociologist with the Clayman. Is it Clayman or Clayman? Yeah, Clayman Institute. I'm very sensitive to pronunciation, correct pronunciation. Clayman Institute for Gender Research at Stanford University. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
So. Yes. It's an easy crowd, apparently. So I'm going to start with just a sobering fact to throw out. In 2014, full-time female workers in the U.S. earned about 79 cents to the male dollar, which is an increase of only 2 cents over the last 10 years. That does not sound like a whole lot of progress. My first question for all of you, if you could just kind of go down the line, is where are we at? What grade would you give us? Do you see progress, and especially for you guys from a Silicon Valley perspective?
Well, progress
Marianne.
has really stalled, is how I would describe it. Sociologists refer to it as the stalled gender revolution. And so there was a lot of progress from the 1960s to the mid-1990s. Women flooded into the workforce, women flooded into higher education. By the early 1980s, women became half of college graduates in our country. We've made progress in education. Women now outpace men, earning about 57% of bachelor's degrees and 60% of master's degrees. But when you look up at the highest levels of power in our society, where decisions get made that impact all of our lives, women are really in the minority. And the numbers have really stalled out over the last 10 years. So it's a positive story in the sense of the long sweep of history in terms of women's rights and other things, but we're stalling out at this particular historical moment when it comes to getting women into leadership and powerful positions.
And
Elisa?
I agree. I feel that we want to feel good about the progress that we've made because we can see women doing things that they haven't done before, and that there are firsts, and you want to celebrate those firsts, but it's not enough.
Okay.
And I would agree as well. Having been in the industry for the last 22 years or so, I wouldn't say that I've seen tremendous change. We are seeing great numbers of people coming into the profession, seeing gender balance there, and we're starting to, I hope we're at the beginning of the next big push.
I'll just say a few things. First of all, I think this is like the negative equalizers, I like to call it, has to do with unequal pay. It doesn't matter if you're a woman working on a plantation in Kenya. It doesn't matter if you're a broker on Wall Street. It doesn't matter if you're a CEO in the tech industry in Silicon Valley. You are all not getting paid equal. So I mean, that alone is just, it says it all. I think we're a long way, and I think more has to be done.
Well, I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, 2 daughters, and I was telling them that I was coming to do this, and trying to explain, and of course I got myself, it totally stuck my foot in my mouth. But I was telling them that there are places in the world where girls can't go to school, and it was such a shock, when you tell girls that are growing up here. But then of course I didn't get into all sorts of other issues that we do have here still, which is a little bit more nuanced. You've written and said that there's no country in the world that has really achieved gender equality. Is there any country that comes close? Do we come close to any bright spots?
Certainly the U.S. doesn't come close, but certainly they are. It's not there yet. It's not there yet. But we are optimistic, right? And I think when you look at Iceland, according to the World Economic Forum, they've been number one for 6 years running. And I'm also proud to say that they are our impact champion on this Impact 10 by 10 by 10 initiative. And hopefully they will become one of the first countries to achieve gender equality. And if I can just sort of share with you briefly, one of the things that they are doing as part of HeForShe is that with each of these impact champions, they had to come up with 3 game-changing commitments. So don't tell us what you're doing to advance or promote, but really what are you doing to look at parity as a feasible thing within this lifetime. In Iceland, when we looked at all the indicators that the WEF measures against this goal, where they were lacking is around the economy, in particular the issue of unequal pay. In some countries, we're still, like the US, there's the issue of women even getting in the workplace, and then we'd address the equal pay. But for Iceland, mostly women are in the workplace, but they are not being paid equal for equal work. And so Iceland came up, their HeForShe commitment is to ensure equal pay for every single citizen in Iceland by 2022. So we're all moving there. And the how is quite fascinating. So starting this year, they are going to audit every single company in Iceland, from the big corporation to the small company that has 3 people, and be able to do annual certification towards equal pay, so that if you're a company in Iceland, if you want to do business by 2022, you have to have equal pay, otherwise you can't work there, operate there. So again, we are quite optimistic that there's a few countries that are emerging, and hopefully we just need one miracle, I think.
And by the way, can you just explain real quick also the 10 by 10 by 10 program and what it is exactly?
Yes. So Impact 10 by 10 by 10 is our initiative within HeForShe that we launched 3 months after the Emma Watson speech, which looked at how can we create structural change, right? Because again, there's only so much as well as an employee that you can do, unless the leaders themselves, again, which are mostly male, are able to actually put the commitment needed. I think it would take a very long time to get there. So we sought out to identify, it's a pilot initiative, right? So we started small to make sure, again, that it's less about the quantity, but it's really about the quality of the people that we include. So it's looking at the areas where progress still has to be made in a big way. So the companies, so it's 10 CEOs, 10 heads of states, and 10 university presidents. And they agreed to one baseline commitment around transparency. So they all have to share with us what's happening within those companies. And then in addition to that as well, they also came up with 3 game-changing commitments that are either looking at how do you transform your own company, and also what are you doing in the countries and the communities in which you operate. So for example, PwC, one of the exciting thing, which again we're discussing during the break, about how a lot has to be done about the idea of positive masculinity, because we also have to we also have to say it's okay for guys to be emotional, right? In order for guys to be emotional. And we have companies like Accor Hospitality. They are going, as part of the HeForShe commitment, ensure equal pay, again, back to the pay issue, for all the 180,000 employees by 2020 as part of HeForShe. We have Unilever, which I'm sure most of you know. It's one of the biggest companies, 2 billion products reach a consumer every single day, from Dove to Axe, etc. Paul Polman, an impact champion, is also going to ensure parity at the management level across all Unilever by 2020. Again, not to mention Twitter and Vodafone, again, with some really innovative ideas on how they are going to address parity within their own companies. Okay. So this is what it's about. We hope that, again, they can serve as a catalyst and role models to show that it can be done. It really can be done.
And just bringing it back to Silicon Valley, Elisa, you're one of a minority here, a female CEO. What do you think our role is? I mean, Silicon Valley certainly has its issues with the gender disparity here, but do you think that we could play a catalyst also for change more broadly in the business world?
I do. I think, Silicon Valley obviously is a place that people look for innovation in all sorts of things. And innovation isn't really just about technology and product. Innovation is about business models. Innovation is about doing things for the first time. Innovation is about pushing the edges of what the establishment has done for many years to do it better. So I don't think there's any better place in the world than Silicon Valley to show how this can be done. And I think we have some of that in the way that Silicon Valley breeds these amazing startups, and men and women have the opportunity to just start their dreams and begin to get, their ideas funded. And I think that's fabulous. But the numbers don't play out
that women are actually advancing. And, we've got all the research that shows that's true. So I think in the Valley, we have the opportunity as both men and women to showcase new things that we can do, to give people the opportunity to, feel empowered to be able to move forward. I also feel, as a CEO, it's incredible to have both men and women on your board, on your management team, in your customers that really work together, because it's about community. I think Elizabeth said it earlier, that everybody has to get involved. This is a movement. This isn't one gender or one role or one title to make this true and real for the world. It's all of us working together. And actually the reason that I'm interested in this and even got started with HeForShe is because of one of our most inspirational customers, PwC, who actually started using the Jive technology to spread the word about HeForShe. And then we realized, wait, we don't want to just use technology. We want to use all of our human capital to become a community of people who can share this story. And then here we are tonight. PwC are, major people on this panel who are working, to change the face of this issue, and everyone who showed up tonight. So thank you so much.
And on that note, Marianne, you recently wrote about meritocracy and technology in the Valley, and in places where we like to tout that we have a meritocracy, but sort of the fallacy of that. Can you explain some of what goes on behind the scenes, what we're not even cognizant of, and why it's a problem to think that a meritocracy in and of itself will solve the problem?
Sure. So I think, to echo your point, this is a land of innovation and a leading cutting edge place. So the first thing we need to do is, like any good 12-step program, is to admit we have a problem. And so we need to admit that we have a very large diversity problem in Silicon Valley. And the problem is that what social science research has found is that individuals who think they are the most objective and managers who think they are the most objective or the most meritocratic actually exhibit the most bias. And the reason why is that they think that they're just being fair in their evaluations and not thinking about the way that stereotypes bias the way we evaluate other people and the way we interact with other people. Companies will even say, we only evaluate people on their merits and their performance, so we don't even need a diversity program. It's not really understanding the day-to-day ways that in people, processes, and interactions, bias is embedded in those interactions and processes. And so, for those in the Valley who want to be leaders on this issue, they need to understand the mechanisms behind why it's happening and then figure out where in their companies, organizations, professional groups they can make change. So that's probably steps 2 through 6 or something.
What's like, give us one easy step everybody can go home and do tonight, tomorrow.
One easy thing is anytime you hear that a woman is being described as too aggressive in how she does her job or in her performance, take a quick second and say, if a man did that exact same thing, would he be too aggressive?
All right. Okay. Colby, we are going to get to you. Don't worry. I promise. But we have a few rapid fire questions. This is like the family feud part of the evening. So you guys all have to hold up your little paddles and don't look at what anybody else is choosing, okay? All right, so first question. In this generation's lifetime, will we see equal representation of men and women in CEO roles? What's your, no, yes. We have one optimist. And luckily she works for the UN. So, all right. It's good.
I'm trying to work myself out of a job. So I need this to happen.
And you know what? I would say not in the generation necessarily of the people who are sitting up here, but I believe, yes, in the generation of people who are starting to work today, or I hope in the generation of people who are starting to work today.
All right.
And I'll just add, because sociologists are generally a depressing lot, that right now we have one of the highest number of women CEOs of S&P 500 companies ever, and we have less than 5%. So there are about 22, at around 22,
I think we just
24.
dropped 2 out of the Fortune 500, so down to 22.
We have
right?
a long way to go.
Thank you for that, Debbie Downer.
That's
all right.
Yeah.
You and your numbers. Okay, second question. In progressive areas like Silicon Valley, do you feel that most men inaccurately assume that more progress has been made to date for female advancement? Okay, one more. There actually will be more of these later on, but they've been interspersed, so just for entertainment's sake. Technology has helped to empower employees and the way that people work overall, from working remotely to more flexible work hours and work structures. That wasn't a question. I.e.
Say yes, though.
True or false? No. The free Jive is great software. True or false? No, I'm kidding. The freelance nation. Do you see advancements in technology having a significant impact in driving positive change regarding gender equality? Could technology have impact in? Okay.
Cheers.
All right. So can you explain?
I know. I didn't know that was an option.
Well, we couldn't go binary on this because I think it could, but I think it does require that commitment we're speaking to, right? Mm-hmm. Because also it can be either a force for good, it can be a force for evil when you look at the trolling that's happening online. So I think it does require the commitment, but there's lots of potential.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So okay, and your perspective?
I absolutely agree with the trolling and the misogyny. That it's comment sections. It's absolutely horrible, and there has to be zero tolerance for it. None. The other piece, though, is while technology allows so much more flexibility in working, if it's not the right technology and it's not used the right way, it can hinder the live interaction that's necessary to build the networks that we need to have. And one of the big things that I've got as I thought about these questions was, our networks are not nearly as diverse as they need to be. And that's the thing that men in particular need to be doing, is actively every day looking to build more diverse professional and personal networks. You can't just look, I need to fill a position. What women do I know? Not going to work, right? You need to be building those relationships every day.
Well, and we'll stick with you actually. So you guys are a charter member, right? HeForShe.
Yes.
Can you explain how that came about and why?
Well, PwC's purpose is to build trust in society and solve important problems. And if you take those two pieces, right, you can't build trust in society if you're not representative of society, right? Who's going to look at you and think, yeah, what you have to say makes a lot of sense? Nobody. And they shouldn't. And I can't think of any more important global problem. And if there are more important global problems, gender inequality is a root cause of that problem in almost every case. So that's sort of the stated line. And it's all true, but it's not the entire story. Mm-hmm. PwC's legacy goes back to the mid-1800s. And if we want to continue to be a premier firm for the next century and a half or longer, which we do, we can't do it without having half of the world want to spend part or maybe all of their career with us, helping to affect that change.
Can I make a quick plug for PwC? Just to say, actually, they were the inaugural Impact Champions of HeForShe. So we launched, yes, I think a round of applause. We launched Impact at Davos in 2016 with 3 CEOs, and PwC was an inaugural partner to that. And they were instrumental in helping us to attract the kind of partners that we ended up having. So I wanted to give them a shout out for that.
Thank you.
And just a follow-up question for you, Colby. The Bay Area is perceived as a progressive place, and you guys have also been pretty progressive and involved when it comes to LGBT rights. Has many companies in the Bay Area. Not to say that is an area that's totally solved either, right? But why do you think we haven't seen more, even as companies here have started releasing their diversity numbers and showing the gender imbalance and racial imbalance too, why do you think we haven't made more progress?
I refuse to believe that men are any less capable of empathy internally than women, because that would just be sad. I think it's inside all of us, but I think that there's a certain pervasive male culture that we have to work actively to chip away at, and destroy, that says empathy isn't rewarded, it's not echoed, it's not embraced, and those men are not inherently expanding that circle of empathy that they have. And we have to make it okay for each other to do that. And frankly, we have to remind each other and poke each other all the time and be on the lookout. Just as you tell someone, hey, did you leave your pen behind? Hey, did you forget to think about gender equality in that situation? Are you being as empathetic as you could be? Right? I mean, that sounds like a joke, but it shouldn't be. I mean, it doesn't sound weird to say, hey, you dropped your pen. Hey, you dropped the thought of a gender inequality. I mean, we have to be on each other. And I think that that's a big part of what's missing. And then just real quick also, I mean, the American liberal, right? This is the other part of that. And we, not to overgeneralize, but this is perceived to be a bastion of sort of American liberalism, right? I mean, we like things, we +1 things, we thumbs up things, that's really easy. And sometimes we get off our butt and we vote, like, yay, feeling really good about myself. But then we'll sit down, we'll watch American Family and be like, yes, this is the new American, this is wonderful. But then if you look at your own networks, and
you mean Modern Family.
Modern Family. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yes, I don't know what I said, but I said the
American
wrong thing.
Family.
I'm sorry. I meant Modern Family.
I haven't seen that
and
one.
So, but then we go and we look at our own social networks. I mean, like, I will admit, right? My Facebook friends are more than 10% gay men. I mean, like, our personal networks look like ourselves. So we have to make an active effort to make those efforts, our networks be different and more diverse in ourselves. And it takes work, and we have to poke ourselves into doing it.
Are there things that you hear where, specific cases you can think of where men say certain things or act a certain way where you could use that opportunity to poke gently?
Yeah, I'll think of one, and I think I've mentioned it to you guys before. Again, people are, I think, a lot of times trying to do the right thing. And I will say this is a specific thing that's happened to me, being a man who's involved in diversity and serving on a panel with some other male partners in the firm to talk about women and career paths and those sorts of things in the firm. And I had to say to them, hey, the women in the firm are not all your mom, your sister, or your wife. I mean, like, I get that you're trying to be empathetic, but think more what was important to you at that stage in your career than what your wife, who may have left the workforce to help you start a family 20 years ago, wanted. Don't assume that this person has the same wants that she had. Not that any wants are more valid than the other, but just don't assume that they're the same.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, in fact, actually talking about things that we've heard, which has been, again, very eye-opening for us on HeForShe, because when we launched the movement, it was about, we had a lot about, how you've got to make this personal to a man, because a man will have a father, or will have a mother, or they'll have a wife, or they'll have a daughter. And actually, what has been interesting is that there is another element to all this that has been very powerful for men in connecting with HeForShe. To give you some very quick examples, one of the letters that we got right after we launched HeForShe was from a guy who's in prison. He's there for murder. He's never coming out. And he sent a very powerful letter to Emma, actually, just to Emma Watson, talking about how he had been raised by a single mom in the Bronx and in New York City, and how his mom told him never to cry, the boys don't cry, that he needed to man up, and all this pressure of what it meant to be a man made him just so cold. And one day he snapped and he said, I killed somebody and I felt absolutely nothing. And he said, this was the very weird thing, he said, I was in prison, and he watched Emma Watson's speech, and he said, it's the first time in my life that I cried. I broke down and I cried, and all these emotions came to me, and I felt liberated, and I realized that I'd been almost imprisoned by this idea of what it meant to be a man. So there's also this very personal thing that we're starting to discover with HeForShe, and even just very quickly, I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but we just launched our Get Free tour, which is targeted at the university students. Since we launched HeForShe, there's more than 200 associations that have happened organically around the world. So we now have this Get Free tour that brings this important conversation to the college. And we were in the UK and France in September. And again, it was the same thing. There's few guys in the audience than there are women. And I would ask in front of everybody, well, why are you here? And the guys would say, well, because I have, I care for my mom, I care for my sister. I pulled the guy to the side and I had a one-on-one conversation with another guy, and I said, why are you here? And all of a sudden he started crying, and he said, well, I know this sounds very silly, because I said to him, what would be a gender equal world look like to you? He said, well, it sounds very silly because I hang out with my friends, and they're all guys, but it's the lad culture in the UK, and we go to the pub and we drink beer, and I hate beer. He said, I really like a fizzy cider. It's like it's sparkling, juice. And he said, for me, a gender equal world is a world in which I can drink my fizzy cider without any judgment from my mates. But I mean, these are like such small things that may look like small things, but because he's under the pressure of, being part of the guys, he has ended up harassing women, because he's under the influence of alcohol, and he doesn't like alcohol. So I think there's also this really interesting thing about tapping into actually what men want themselves as well, beyond the social, economic, and political imperative, which is really important, and also the women in their lives. But anyway,
and I think one of the things that resonated so well with HeForShe and with Emma Watson's speech is when she said that feminism does not equal man hating. And it's become synonymous. So with that in mind, how do you guys look at implementing changes in organizations without pointing fingers, without man hating, without turning it into that kind of speech?
Well, I think, one of our biggest opportunities as women is to actually have the relationships with men in the business world, because it is true that they're dominant in the business world. And I think women need to help women, and men have just as much a desire to help a woman succeed as they do to help a talented man succeed. And I think it's probably been very difficult to know how to act, know what to do. How do I actually create that valued relationships? How do I help someone move forward? And I guess I would say in my career, one of the biggest learnings I've had is from mentors who are male, who I've learned a lot from, or who continue to have an interest in helping me learn. And I think that one of the reasons I really resonated with HeForShe is one of the only organizations that actually says really straightforward and outspoken that we all want to help each other. It's not about women. It's actually about this whole issue of gender equality, and men and women have to help make that true. So that's kind of the philosophy I feel, Michal. And as I go to work every day, I just try to find the team and the spirit that everyone wants to accomplish something together, and find the best people who can make that happen. If you find the best people for the best team that you can create, you're actually going to find that it's diverse just by the natural need to have that kind of diverse thinking, attitude, and approach to solving problems.
And to build on your point, gender equality is not a loss for men. And a lot of people perceive it or can perceive it in that way. And it actually is it can be a gift for men. If you think about the changes of the last 30 years for women, women actually have a lot more latitude to be a bunch of different ways than do men. So, and a great example of this is it is totally fine in our society now for girls to play with Legos. It is still not fine at all for little boys to play with dolls. Not fine at all. And that's what I'm getting at, is that we are pretty clear we want to raise strong girls. We're not sure about sensitive boys or what that means or what that looks like. And this gets back to, we need to transform what we think about when we define masculinity and what it means and what it's about. And it's doing a disservice for men from being alienated from their emotions, as the man in prison is explaining, to fathers not being able to leave work necessarily and say, I'm leaving to go do this with my kid, because it actually, research shows that men can be even more penalized than women for doing caretaking roles, because it's a violation of what men are supposed to be doing, which is just earning money. Just other statistics, half of fathers are worried they're not spending enough time with their children. So if we can expand what it means to be a woman or to be a man, and to think more about being a full human being, I think everyone has something to gain in this movement.
And I didn't mention this when I introduced you, but Marianne was the lead researcher, and still is, for Lean In, for the book and the movement. Are there any other tidbits that you can share with us in your research that were just really profoundly surprising to you as you were going about your work?
I get that question a lot. And so I've been working on these issues for 20 years, and so nothing surprised me.
That would surprise us, maybe.
Yeah. So personally, I would say what was so surprising to me, the reaction to Lean In, is how much we knew in academia about the way gender works and these dynamics that happen, and how little of it we had gotten out to the general public. And what I think was so special to me about Lean In is getting that knowledge out and sharing it with the broader public and giving people things to name their experience, so they could say, oh, it's not, I don't get interrupted just because I can't communicate my thoughts. It's like, no, that's a pattern. Women get interrupted more than men. This is, your individual experiences are much, much, much larger social patterns, and naming them and understanding them, and then figuring out what you can do about it. So that's my personal surprise. But the research that always gets me, and I think helps a lot of women, is this finding about the time that mothers spend with their children in a historical sense. So working mothers today spend the same amount of time on primary childcare activities as stay-at-home mothers did in the 1970s.
What were they doing the rest of the time?
So I know. Yeah. So the way
disco dancing.
So the way it works out is, when I was growing up, like, we played with neighborhood kids. My mom didn't sit next to me when I was doing my homework, but there's been an elevation of mothering, as we call it, the rise of intensive mothering. And a good mother is now someone who's completely devoted to their child all the time, 24/7. And that becomes the yardstick by which a lot of women judge how good of a mother they are. And since it's a ridiculous standard, we're all coming up short all the time. And so we need to think about these cultural pressures that are on us and where they come from, and know, and this is what I say to women all the time, is I would tell you not to feel guilty, but I know that's not going to work. So I encourage women to feel less guilty. And because my generation, I think, turned out fine. So, if you're not there every second for your kid, they will be okay.
Good to know.
My 15-year-old daughter's here nodding, going, yep, I'm okay when I'm not there every single second. Yep, she finally woke up for the panel.
That's awesome. Okay, more rapid fire questions. You have yours, Elisa?
Oh, I do.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. By 2025, will the majority of companies have leaders focused on diversity in the workplace? Yes or no?
Can I be this?
Yes, no. Colby?
Well, all right. When I think the majority of companies, so many people are employed by small businesses, very small ones. Half of the American workforce works for companies with fewer than 500 employees, which is mid-size. But that's so many people who won't have an in-house necessarily advocate organization or people looking out for them, or any kind of formal programs to remind people to do that sort of poking. And that's why organizations like HeForShe are so important, to get this to be a cultural movement. And I think that the government, can do more. The fact that we don't have an Equal Rights Amendment yet just boggles the mind.
Within the next 10 years, will there be standards enforced for equal pay in the United States? Oh. Then nobody's even half turned. No. How about the next 20 years? All right, should we all move to Iceland?
I think we should.
They also have Bjork, so,
They have Bjork.
Is Silicon Valley in a position to help lead the nation on gender equality? We kind of addressed this already, but you got to choose one.
I hope so.
Maybe. Okay. Will we have a female president in the next year? These people are covering their ass. All right.
In the next 10 years.
Okay, next 10 years?
Definitely.
Yes.
Definitely?
Yes.
I think so.
Yeah.
Marianne?
I think it's coming any day.
Yes.
Okay. So we're gonna turn it over to you guys for questions in just a few minutes, but let's try to end with some optimism. Let's just kind of go down. I mean, give me specific anecdotes or just any bright spots, like a really great story, like something that's happened at Jive or elsewhere throughout your career. I mean, give me what we should walk away with, why we should walk away with, feeling hopeful.
Well,
okay, this wasn't in the notes.
I'll start.
No,
Okay.
but go ahead.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I've been doing this for a long time, and I've never experienced a historical moment where we're talking about women, gender, masculinity in the public discourse as we are right now. So from my perspective, I'm like, go, and get as far as we can until attention turns a different direction. It's, I think, because people thought gender equality would just happen. Right. Once women could go to the same universities as men, and we had a lot of different equal opportunity moments. I think everyone just thought over time this problem would resolve, and I think we've woken up and been very surprised to find how little progress has been made. And so that energy, the reaction to HeForShe, the ability of technology to spread information so rapidly and so far, I actually think it's pretty hopeful that we're going to make at least a significant chunk of progress.
For me, I'll tell just a quick story. When I remember being in grad school and doing, as you do in grad school, a ton of group work. Mm-hmm. And I went to grad school before having a lot of work experience behind me, and the school I was at had mostly people who had pretty decent experience of 5+ years in the workplace, and most of the students, the majority of students were men. And I remember being in my work group for a particular class that was very difficult. And I was incredibly intimidated by my group of 5 working men, about 10 to 20 years my senior. And in the group, I had, of course, ideas, as everybody does, about how to go forward and get a great grade and have a good experience. And I didn't do that. I actually became the assistant to the group because I was really intimidated by these guys know a lot more than I do, and I can't be right. Mm. And we got a D in our group. And I had never gotten a D in my life in anything. And I remember the professor called me afterwards and said, Elisa, what the heck are you doing? Why aren't you, standing up for what you think the group should do? And I remember the feeling of just being terrified that I didn't know how to do that. And I realized that it wasn't actually about feeling intimidated or feeling that someone's better. It was about working together and actually creating a value exchange of what you can bring to the table. So I guess that would be my story with hope, because as I look across what I've been able to experience in my career, there's always been a moment where, gosh, if you're working with someone who's smarter than you or has more experience than you or has a different opinion than you, you're actually learning something and doing something you've never been able to achieve before because you're in that environment. So now, many years later, I say bring it on.
Mm-hmm. Colby?
I would say PwC employs 208,000 people around the world. Last year, for the first time, we had gender parity in the number of college graduates that entered the firm. I think I mentioned that. We also had, across the PwC network, 26% of our new partner admits were women, which is pretty good for us. We're moving in a good direction. I think PwC is not unique, and that's good. I think this is happening in other organizations as well. 2 things have happened inside the firm that I think have made this the case. One, the firm has realized that this whole holy grail of partnership isn't the thing for everybody. We have to be a place that enhances the intellectual and emotional lives of all the people who ride along with us for a while and leave them in a better place where they take something away into the world. So I think a lot of people are starting their careers with PwC and go on to become controllers, CFOs, CIOs, and do all other kinds of exciting things. And I think that that's great. I think that's creating that kind of a pipeline. And like I said, I hope we're not unique. I think this is happening a lot of other places. And this is what I hope is the start of that second wave that I talked about when no one could hear me at the beginning, when we talked about sort of the seeming stagnation. I think it's coming to an end.
So I'll share a story that inspires me every single day as I do this work on HeForShe. So in the 70s in Japan, there were some scientists that were observing these monkeys that lived on these small islands there. And in addition to the scientists giving these monkeys food, the monkeys would fend for themselves. So they would go and dig up sweet potato, and they would just eat it straight from the ground. Until one afternoon, a little monkey dug up the sweet potato and didn't eat it just like that. He went to the river and he washed the sweet potato. He went back home and he taught his mom how to wash the sweet potato, who then taught her mate how to wash the sweet potato. And it went on and went on and went on until the 99th monkey had washed its sweet potato. So this whole effect is called the 100th monkey effect. And so one Thursday afternoon, the 100th monkey washed the sweet potato and something magical happened. The scientists noticed that monkeys that were on different islands that had nothing to do with this particular island, completely disconnected, started picking up the same behavior. So this anthropologist, Watson, who was a South African, actually wrote this theory that when enough of us in society hold something to be true, it becomes true for everyone. So every single morning, I hope that, just the one person that takes an action on HeForShe, the one person that we sort of sign on and have as supporters for gender equality, I think the more of us that sort of create this momentum, at some point, if you're not one of those people, you'll find that you're standing on the wrong side of history. So this is really sort of the thing that inspires me, and I think we are seeing that trend move with HeForShe.
Very cool. Okay, questions from you guys. Raise your hand right here. Do we have a microphone, or should we do have a microphone. If you could just introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Barbara Mark, and I've been doing professional development with women in corporate for 30 years. So I've seen broad strokes of change, not nearly as much as I would like to see. I want to resonate with you that more change has happened in the past couple of years than I've seen in the arc of the work that I've been doing. I'm also believing very much in the 100th monkey theory, and I'm the delusional baby boomer in the room who thinks that I will see gender parity in my lifetime. Clearly I'm planning on living a long time, but I'm moving toward that. But the question that I have is, I've been doing research for a book that I'm writing, and I'm interviewing people in corp across the genders and across generations about what they see as women in leadership. What are the changes that they're seeing? What are the opportunities that they're seeing as people who are on the ground? And so I'm curious to find out, what are the force factors that you're seeing that will move a business case to support gender parity? There are a lot of optics in Silicon Valley in particular. There's been a lot of people calling out people about, their numbers. But what are the force factors that are going to support the business case, that are really going to get companies to take it seriously and say, if we're going to be competitive in the business world, we're going to have to take it seriously?
Marianne, do you want to take a stab at that, maybe?
Sure. I mean, I think different reasons resonate with different types of people, but if you're a consumer product company and you realize that women make or influence 80% of consumer spending decisions in the household, then you might want to have a lot of women employees at every phase of the product cycle so that you're reflecting your consumer base. I mean, in 30 years also, we're going to be our country is going to be more diverse than it's ever been, and we're going to be a majority minority country. So as a company, you want to be in front of that trend and not behind that trend, which means your workforce has to be diverse, not just from a gender perspective, but in all ways. But for other companies, there is a business case for diversity. It just depends whether or not you want to believe it. That's a different question. Diverse teams, when they're set up to leverage that diversity, perform better. I actually see this. I mean, you do these things. I wish people did them because it's the right thing to do, or it's a corporate social responsibility. But this is fundamentally an economics issue. Fundamentally. So economists estimate that about a quarter of the growth in GDP over the last 2 decades has been because women have gone into the workforce. If we narrowed the employment gap between men and women in our country, our GDP would go up by 5%. Right? These are huge economic forces to include women in the workforce and to have them rise up in organizations. So I think the other question is why it's not mattering more to people who are in leadership positions. Because if you're not thinking about how to manage a company well, which means having a diversity strategy, by definition, your team, your group, your company, your organization are underperforming.
We have a question, a very high-tech question in from Twitter on a piece of paper. Do you think that until women get 1 year paid maternity leave and workplace childcare, they will not choose to be career leaders? Do you want to take that, Elizabeth?
No, actually, I think the bigger question, and again, it's one of the things we're addressing with Sweden, another impact champion, is the issue of paternity leave, right? Because it's not just about the woman having more time to go take care of the children. It's about, shared responsibility of raising a family. And so I think one of the things we're pushing as UN Women is to look at these issues equally, right? We want paternity leave. We also want men to spend more time with their kids. And again, not just because they have to, but also because it is an important thing as we're discussing here. So for me, it's less about maternity. It's really about how do we create paternity leave, so that again, both parents are able to, have the same opportunities.
Okay. Question over here.
Hi, we've been doing a lot of discussion about kind of high-level corporate gender equality, but what are you doing, what efforts are being made to reach the people who can't reach you, who can't visit the HeForShe website on their own? What kind of outreach is there?
Great question.
So this was my ask for Silicon Valley. I think one of the challenges that we're still facing with HeForShe is how do we, to your point, exactly reach everybody. It's important to point out though that HeForShe is both an online and offline movement. UN Women is in 90 country offices around the world. The UN itself in almost 200 countries, and we are literally mainstreaming HeForShe not just within UN Women but across the UN agencies, because as Ban Ki-moon's Secretary General often says, there is a role for men to play in every single mandate of the UN. When you look at the work of UNESCO and the need for girl education, there's a need to have more Malala fathers, right? When you look at the work that UNFPA does on reproductive health, as I mentioned to you before, we need more men to understand that really it is a woman's right to choose, what she does with her body. So we have activities happening on the ground continuously with our country offices in communities. Again, they are best within those cultures, so they know how to engage locally, again, bearing in mind the diversity and the cultural differences. But certainly one of the biggest gaps that we have is how do we get people that are not connected on the internet but have cell phones? I'm from Africa. We don't have internet, but certainly even my grandmother has a cell phone. So how do we make sure that, we create the right apps for them to activate? And again, it's something that we are looking for partners that can help us to achieve this goal.
I'll take a question over here and then back there. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Maria Aga, and I represent a company called Strap. It's a management consulting firm working for the development sector for over 14 years. My question to your group is whether they see change coming from the rural to the urban or from urban to the rural. Thank you.
Elizabeth?
Yeah.
Or Marianne, do you want to take it?
I mean, I feel like you have the most expertise on that.
It's different, right? Because again, as the UN, we're a global entity, and there is just so much diversity that we have to consider when we talk about how do you define progress and change. The story that I told you of a man in Nigeria stopping domestic violence is such a powerful story, and it came from a rural village, right? My own story with my father growing up in a small village and understanding the importance of me going to school. So I think it's almost relative. It's a different type of progress that we are seeing. Certainly more has happened within the cities, and again, it could be because of the access to information, access to technology, versus perhaps in some cases. But again, it's also even within a cultural context. Some women I've spoken to in Saudi do not want the same things that I want, and it's not our job to sort of impose what we think, and we have to. It's the UN. There's the fine balance of respecting that, but of course, at the same time, realizing some of these things are human rights issues, and so we have to push for that. I know it's a very long-winded thing, and maybe doesn't answer your question, but it's a complex thing, I think.
We had a question back there.
Just wanted to say thank you all again for speaking. My name is Raphael. I'm in tech recruiting, so I've been in the Googles and the other companies that are making that push for diversity in the workplace. But Marianne made a lot of good points earlier about the discourse of women in the workplace since the 1960s, and you said there was a stalling And Elisa made some good points about pushing through different stereotypes of what the role of the women is when it gets to that point. And I wanted to kind of ask, is there anything that can be done, or is there any type of awareness to kind of influence or build confidence in women to really go for those positions of leadership more in more numbers? Because when you get to that place, there's a lot of women who may feel like they don't want to go for those roles because of certain situations, which you explained, Elisa, about having a family, having to take the time off, and not being able to put that time in. So I'm curious, Elizabeth, if there's if HeForShe would bring any type of initiatives or outreach for women that are senior level or in leadership to really be aggressive, if you call it that. So, or men to be able to understand that aggression is saying, hey, I want to be a leader, and let's carry out what we're doing here to bring women along, especially what Elisa was saying, being around men who have the experience, who are smarter. All the points you guys made, exactly what we want to do, but I'm just curious as to what the panel and what the organization is looking to do to improve that based off what you said earlier.
There's a great book called Lean In that is all about that. But I think to add to that, and it is a book. I had a friend of mine was like, I'm going to get it for my wife. I'm like, you can read it. It's kind of a HeForShe tangent, which is like men should read and lean in too, and not just the paragraphs that your wife highlights and puts on your pillow or whatever. So I would say that reading those kinds of books. But what I've seen from so Lean In has supports Lean In circles, and at the Clayman Institute we have something called Voice and Influence circles. And I think there's something very powerful about women coming together, women and men, in small groups to really support each other and take the time. Life is so busy, right? But if you have take the commitment, I guess, to meet with a small group of people and to meet regularly to talk through the different issues that come up, and people share their experiences and their tips and their strategies. And when you hear a story like that, everyone's had that moment where they haven't spoken up because they've been intimidated and thinking the person next to them is smarter. And sharing that, I think, I've just seen it really change people's lives and enable people to go for opportunities that they never would have gone for before. So I think we all have the power to connect in that way, but it's making the commitment to do it.
I think it's a really tough question because it is up to individual accountability and feeling that you can actually affect someone else. It's actually one of the most inspiring parts of the job is to work with people and create and support opportunity, whether it's doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman, of how they can achieve what they want to achieve. So I think it has a lot to do with relationships, and I don't think it has as much to do with these big programs. Like, one of the most maddening things about the maternity question is a lot of the women who get to take more time off is because they have the means to be able to do it. It's not because there's a program for it. It's because they're in a situation where they have the means to do it, especially in this country. We're one of the unfortunate, one of the worst countries in terms of supporting women for maternity leave. And if a woman doesn't have the means, then they wind up kind of forced into the decision whether it's what they want to do or not, to have this shorter time away from work. So I really think it's about relationships, and it's about creating opportunity for each other, because at the end of the day, technology can power all this networking, and technology can power incredible connection, but it's people that create opportunities for other people and support the growth and development of that. And every single person in this room and every single person who cares about this issue can impact that.
Yeah. So I think, just to echo your point, people create movements, and those movements that create impacts. I think the question is nothing to do with women needing to be more aggressive. I actually think certainly we have the power to break the glass ceiling, but it would also be lovely if a man just literally removed the glass ceiling, so we don't have to break the glass ceiling, right? and so and this is why I think with HeForShe we are targeting the individual, because sometimes we speak about companies as if to say they sort of happen in a vacuum, or it's its own thing. Companies are made of individuals, and we are asking that for those individuals to take the action, right? It's as simple as literally promoting one woman. Next time you think about hiring, make sure you look at the diversity within your own team. Would be nice, for you to say, well, I'm not going to accept my paycheck until Dell gets paid the same amount of money. I mean, it's as simple as that, right? So it's about individual actions.
One last question over here. You have a microphone coming.
Thank you all for being here. I wanted to start my question. It's a sort of a two-part question. You raised a good point right now. But my question is really tied to how much of the HeForShe movement or how much of gender equality is actually driven or should be driven by regulation or should be driven by legislation. I use Rwanda as an example. Rwanda is number 7 on the World Economic Forum report you mentioned. And part of Rwanda's secret sauce is actually legislation. You actually need a certain amount of women in politics, in business. And I wonder if legislation should be the approach or could have the impact we're seeking to have more long term, but also more immediately, right? Because it's different when we say this is the law, companies will adapt to do what the law is, versus an individual movement that may take a longer time. So I wonder what your thoughts are on that. And I did read Lean In, which seems much more focused on the individual level, which I do appreciate. But I just wonder if legislation may maybe move the needle a little faster or a little further.
So here's a shocking statistic. Most countries actually have legislation, right? The biggest gap is implementation. So again, you then come back to the individual making the commitment to implement. And I think your question is it's a valid question, and I think there's 2 ways of approaching it. Certainly in some cases, we have to put the quota law because otherwise nothing happens. And Rwanda is also an impact champion, by the way. But again, there's also the theory that says when someone is in a cushy position, when they're comfortable, they really have no motivation to do something. And we've seen, Pumzila often says a revolution is not started on consensus, right? And so sometimes we have to have both the bottom up and the grassroots in the top down happening at the same time. Sometimes we need the uprise to put the pressure on governments, on companies to create the change. But again, the idea behind HeForShe, and I'll keep going on to this, it is about the individual within those positions. Everybody agrees that gender inequality is not a good thing. Everybody agrees that women should not be beaten to death. There is, as the UN, there is this law, but it's not being implemented because there isn't that personal commitment to get it done.
So we're pretty much out of time. I just want to end with a couple of calls to action. So the first one is online. You can register for the HeForShe movement at heforshe.pwc.com at one of the on-site iPad stands, which are around here. Yes, thank you. And I encourage the Periscope audience to sign up as well, wherever you are out there. And then the other thing is just, on a more personal level, I mean, we talk about this topic a lot, and like you were saying, step 1 is admitting that we have a problem. So I think it's very, very important to keep talking about it, and that's already doing something, just raising awareness. But to your point, whatever washing the sweet potato means to you, go home, go to your office, and do it. So thank you guys so much for sharing everything, and for you.
Thank you.